guys, hello, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be looking at some 1-star reviews of some of my 5-star reads. I did this video once before, about a year ago at this point, and obviously since then I have read so many more books. So I've got a collection of 11 books that have been kind of like my top favorite reads of the past year or so, or since that last video. And yeah, I'm just ready to see the stuff that people say. I will say in general, like before we get into it, this is all for fun. Every book is definitely not for everybody. So a book that I love might be a book that you hate or vice versa. And there's no hard feelings either way. Like I just think this is gonna be fun. Anyway, that's kind of like my spiel going into this process, this trash talk that we're about to do, and I'm very excited about it. And without further ado, let's start with our first book. I have my Goodreads pulled up. The majority of the books that I'm going to mention are 5-star reviews, but some of them, like this first one, which is Kingdom of the Wicked. This one specifically I actually rated 4 stars, but the series overall, I definitely gave a 5 stars too. I am obsessed with this series. There was like a good chunk of time, like a few months worth of time where I mentioned it constantly. So I was obsessed with this series, still am. And again, that first book was kind of a 4-star read. It was my least favorite of the entire series, but I still really enjoyed it, obviously. So let's go ahead and look at some 1-star reviews. The very first review that it pulled up for me says, "I did not see this coming. I know a lot of readers loved and devoured it, so I apologize in advance." I kind of love that she's like, I know that you loved this book, but I'm sorry I did not. It's just that I waited for a long while for this book to come out, but seriously disappointed after having read it, which I can totally relate to with other books. Like some books I read and I'm just like, oh, because the hype was just like so high. And I do kind of tend to avoid books for really long amounts of time just because they are getting so much hype. Then she said, "There were so many inconsistencies in the plot. Amelia as a character was super annoying and did illogical things most of the time." Yeah. "There was zero chemistry between the leads and the mythology could have been explained in a better way." And then it has in parentheses, "Her writing style is very different from her Stalking Jack the Ripper series, and I was left confused," which is kind of funny because this series is written by Carrie Maniscalco, and I, again, love Kingdom of the Wicked, and she does have another series, Stalking Jack the Ripper, which is obviously a series about Jack the Ripper, and I've just like never had any interest really in reading the Jack the Ripper series. And it's kind of funny that she didn't like Kingdom of the Wicked, but it seems like she did like Jack the Ripper, so we'll see. Also, too, by the way, I'm going to be blocking out people's names and things because I know that they're like publicly putting their opinions on Goodreads, but they're not necessarily expecting me to like put them on blast on YouTube, you know what I mean? So I'm gonna just block them out. Oh no, this one says, "If I made a list of top worst books of 2020, this would be on it." That's sad. "You know, I could have forgiven how bad this was if it had been at least entertaining, but it was bland as I feel like that first book is definitely giving you a lot of backstory and kind of doing a lot of plot building for the rest of the series. So I can definitely kind of see where they're coming from. And this would be a series that I would recommend. Like if you didn't really like the first book that much, try the second one, see if it gets better for you." Somebody said, "I cried finishing this because it was finally over." "This book was so bad." Smiley face. I love that. This person said, "The author tried. It had all the elements a perfect enemies to lovers book requires, but instead it turned out cringe and scripted. I didn't care for any of the characters and especially hated our protagonist, whose character development was boring and unrealistic. As said before, the dialogue felt scripted and the characters were flat. And the worst thing is that I loved Stalking Jack the Ripper, another series by this author, but this was just not it, crying emoji." So this review actually is very, very similar to that other one, so clearly people have very similar thoughts. And I think we're gonna go ahead and stop there for this book just because, I mean, I could go all day. If I haven't read a book, I don't look at the reviews, but once I've read a book, I love like running to Goodreads to kind of see what people are saying. And I typically do tend to look at like 3-star reviews because I feel like those ones are the most constructive, because a lot of the 1-star reviews are just like ripping the book apart and they hated everything about it. But then on the flip side of that, the 5-star reviews I feel like are too, "Oh my god, this was the best book on the planet," kind of a thing. And I feel like 3-star reviews typically tend to be, again, more constructive. Like there's a little bit of, this was the good part, this was the bad part. And usually, no matter how I rate a book, I kind of can see what people are saying in those reviews. So anyway, let's go ahead and move on to our second book. And I need to figure out which that is. I'm trying to like flip between Notion and Goodreads, and I keep accidentally like opening other apps, which is very annoying. The next one that we have is Serpent and Dove. I just spelled serpent very wrong. I read Serpent and Dove like right after reading Kingdom of the Wicked. Kingdom of the Wicked, if you're not familiar, is basically about a witch and the 7 princes of hell, all of which embody one of the 7 deadly sins. Love the concept of that. And then as far as like Serpent and Dove goes, this one is basically at its bare bones like a romance between a witch and a witch hunter. But there's so many other characters. There's different types of witches. There's a couple other creatures that we get to know. Vampires get introduced in the like spin-off series, which is also another favorite that I've read this past year. But since I'm already talking about Serpent and Dove, I didn't want to add like every book in the series, you know? So we're just gonna stick with Serpent and Dove. And let's go ahead and look at some 1-star reviews. The very first one says, "This is one of the most ridiculous books I've read this year, and it's only January. It has such an absurd setup for the plot, clumsy characterization, and the humor lands very poorly. I cringed every time the main character would loudly sing Big Titty Liddy. I did like the one sex scene though." So apparently this one also has spice in it. I don't remember that. I feel like I'm so used to reading spice now that I don't remember if a book has spice or not. I remember specifically one time somebody asking me about the spice level in a book, and I felt so bad because I like could not really remember. Like I knew it had some in it, but I couldn't remember like how much or how intense it was. I just know that it has it. And yeah, I've gotten a little jaded with the spice scenes. I don't know that I agree with any of this, but I will say the Big Titty Liddy song was mentioned several times, but I thought it was funny. And I kind of liked it with the dynamic of the 2 love interests because the main character, the witch, is very like crude and just like outgoing. She's a witch, that kind of thing. And the witch hunter is very like stoic. He's very serious. So her singing Big Titty Liddy to him was funny in my opinion. This person said, "I did my best, but after 350 of 500 pages, I had to DNF. I think this is my first DNF of the year, which makes me sad, but this was a miserable experience from the beginning to end." Aw. There's a lot more to that where she gets more into like details of like why she didn't like it, but we're gonna just leave that at that. Someone said, "It's a nope for me. It would have been a lot better if Reed and Lou had just been platonic. The romance from 0 to 100 way too quickly." The best characters were Ansel and Coco for sure. Those 2 side characters were definitely really fun, which actually is one of the reasons why I loved this series so much. I think I actually liked Serpent and Dove a little bit better than Kingdom of the Wicked. Like I love the concept of Kingdom of the Wicked more with like the 7 deadly sins, Princess of Hell thing, but the actual like characters I think I preferred in Serpent and Dove, and just like the way that the story flowed, because there was so many things going on throughout that entire series, and instead of just having the love interest, we had an abundance of other characters that we really got to know and things like that. And it kind of also had like a found family vibe, which I freaking love. I say that all the time on this channel, but still really loved them both. This person said, "Lowering my rating because enough people love this that I don't need to feel bad." This is a romance set in a world that just so happens to be fantasy. The main plot is about the developing romance between the witch and the witch hunter, and it somehow was still not the best romance. I've definitely read worse, but I also expected better. That's fair. Here's one of my favorite types of reviews. "Words currently fail me to express how ridiculous this book was, so here's a summary. No. Every once in a while you select a silly, fun book and it surprises you by being compulsively readable and emotionally affecting, transcending cliche and developing unique and engrossing characters, and making you want to stay in that world a lot longer." This was not that book. It seems like the majority of the people for this just thought the plot was ridiculous and didn't like the characters. The next book that we have, we're going to switch it up a little bit and do a horror book, and we're going to go for The Troop by Nick Cutter. This is one of those books that I think I rated it a little bit higher than I probably would have normally, just because it took me by surprise. I didn't expect to like it nearly as much as I did, and I do feel like I really enjoyed the way that the author described things, like the actual writing of the book versus the plot of the book. This is definitely one of those horror books that's more gross than scary. It's basically about people being infested by, but the writing in my opinion was just so good that I actually even got, or my friend got for me, another book by Nick Cutter. I did look up some reviews for this book on Barnes & Noble before I purchased it, and a lot of people, like on Barnes & Noble, this does not have a good review, and most of those reviews were basically people being like, this was really gross. So I'm kind of expecting these to be similar. This first one is a very long review, so I don't think I'm gonna read the whole thing, but it says, "Hi and welcome to another episode of Who the Hell is Publishing This Shit?" Tonight we feature a novel from the horror genre that sits squarely in the subgenre of flat-out disturbing. I am your host, a left-wing liberal who has read enough gore to consider myself semi-well-versed in the tricks of the trade. Unfortunately, author Nick Cutter has taken the tropes of every B film ever made and spewed them onto page after disgusting page, piling ineffective metaphors, similes, and horrifying images onto one another, resulting in a quivering, gelatinous, nausea-inducing heap of absolute garbage. I love that. I do actually want to clarify that I did not give this book 5 stars. I don't believe. I think it got like a 4, or I don't know, probably a 4, but I'm also not a horror reader. I only very specifically read them in fall, specifically mostly October. I only read like a handful, maybe. So kind of take my word, I guess, or my opinion with a grain of salt. This person clearly reads a lot of horror and they hated it. So if you also are a horror reader, maybe take his word for it more than mine. I'm not going to read the rest of his review because it is very long and it goes into more detail about the book, which I don't obviously want to spoil anything for anyone, but I will say kind of like a warning, there is harm to animals in this book. From the Barnes & Noble reviews, I kind of went into that book knowing that and kind of was like worried about it, but honestly, I'm a big animal lover, but I know it's like not real, so it doesn't really bother me. I mean, there was one scene that like was a little horrifying. It had to do with a turtle. So if you've read that book, you know what I'm talking about? But for the majority of the things, I don't know, it doesn't really bother me. This next review says, I am definitely the odd man out here as I seem to be the only person not loving it. I know for those of you that did, you might be thinking I am squeamish or not really into horror, but that's not true at all. I think there isn't much I can't read, and I've always loved a good spook. That being said, let's be clear here. Did you hear this book isn't for the faint-hearted or weak-stomached? That is an understatement of the year. I have read some tough scenes and disgusting and disturbing stuff, but this takes the cake. The gross and gruesome is relentless. I'm not talking more than a few scenes. I'm talking the entire novel. Be warned. So this is again another review from someone that likes gore and likes horror books and was disturbed by it. And I just really wasn't. I mean, again, there was gross stuff and there was a lot of stuff that I was like, ugh. But at the end of the day, I know it's not real and I can't actually see it. Like, I can picture things in my head, obviously, but like I can't see it, so it doesn't really bother me at the end of the day. Another one that says, gross. Without a doubt, the most graphic, disgusting, and gory book I have ever read. I'm mystified that I even finished it since it had scene after scene of animal torture and human cruelty. I really try to push the boundaries with my October reads, but this was just too much. And I think with that, we are going to wrap it up for the troop because literally all the one-star reviews are basically just like, this is so gross. Now let's go ahead and do something completely different from the troop, which is a spicy romance, Reckless by Elsie Silver, which is the 4th book in the Chestnut Springs series, which is my favorite of the series. Originally, I was just gonna do Flawless because it's the 1st book in the series, but Reckless was definitely my favorite. So we're gonna go with that one. And this is basically a romance that is featuring Theo, who is basically another bull rider slash like, what's the word? I wanna say apprentice, but that's not the right word. The main character from our 1st book is also a bull rider and he's kind of taken Theo under his wing. I don't know what that would be called. Anyway, point being, this is about a bull rider and a girl that we didn't meet until this book, so I'm not gonna bother saying details about her. All right, so let's look at these 1-star reviews. These ones might hurt me in my heart a little bit. I am begging authors to stop writing sex scenes to pander to the spicy book talk crowd. It is not the amount of steam in this book I have an issue with. It actually felt quite low, but the way it was written. I couldn't decide if I should laugh or cringe. Turns out I did both. Clearly, Elsie Silver wants this book to go viral, and all the sex scenes felt written for TikTok videos. Cringe. You know what? I actually agree with this a little bit because I also just literally finished last night the last book in her 1st series, or the one previous to Chestnut Springs, which is the Gold Rush Ranch series, and I'm just now realizing, because of this review, that the spice scenes were different in that series. Comparing the 2 series together, I definitely feel like Chestnut Springs is more about shock value with like what they're saying. Like a lot of the stuff that the men say is like kind of crude compared to Gold Rush Ranch, where that's more about kind of a love type of thing. Like it's a little cringy still, but like because it's so mushy gushy. So it's very different vibes, and I didn't realize it until reading this. So that's kind of interesting. There's more to that review, but we're gonna move on. Okay, this person has a very strong opinion. It says, if you are a self-loathing person who has no worth for your own mind and soul, then this is the series I recommend you to read. And then underneath that they put, please note that this is by no means a sugar-coated review. Yeah, got that. Figured that one out already. So this one I feel like is a rare sighting. This is a 1-star review with good and bad things, which I feel like usually 1-star reviews, like I said, like earlier, it's usually just people being like, this is trash. No one really ever has anything good to say in a 1-star review, but this one does. The good, I freaking love and adore Theo. Same. He's such a great male lead. I love the found family / friend group of these books. Same. There's a trope in here I usually hate, but it worked in this book and was written well. Same. It's kind of funny, the 2 books in this series that had the tropes that I was looking forward to the least actually ended up being my favorites of the series. Also, too, to kind of put that in perspective, I read another book from another series that had the same trope in it right after reading this one, and I didn't like it nearly as much. So there's definitely something to say for the way that Elsie Silver writes. Like, she just writes really good, easy to read, enjoyable books. Now, let's get into the bad. I hated Winter in the previous books. Oh yeah! Is this about Winter and Theo? I'm such an idiot. This one is about Theo, the bull rider, and Winter, which is the female character from the first book's sister. So we have definitely met her before. I think we actually knew more about Winter going into this book than we did about Theo, so I don't know where my brain went. But anyway, I hated Winter in the previous books. Same. In parentheses, it says she gives Nesta vibes, which Nesta is from ACOTAR, if you haven't read that series, and I hated Nesta through the entire series. Like, the most recent book in that series is literally just solely about Nesta, and that book took me so long to get through, like weeks to get through, because I just could not get into it because Nesta was so infuriating to me. If you've read either of these books, Nesta's and Winter's, I typically don't like, but I do feel like this book, in my opinion, did redeem Winter. In this book, I hated her inner dialogue. I was constantly irritated and annoyed with her, which made it hard to read. I guess I can kind of see that, because for me personally, I think it's because like her actions and her inner dialogue are so conflicting. Like, it's different, and it's just like, why can't you just act the way that you're thinking? You know what I mean? So I can see that being annoying. I don't know if that's what this person is talking about, but I can definitely see that being annoying. This one says, the best part of this book was reading all of the comments in the 1-star reviews. I finished it with the hope it would get better. It didn't. Then we got a couple of DNFs, one of which just says, so cringe, I'm so sorry. And then the other one that says, I genuinely hate this book. I tried to push through because I'm an Elsie Silver stan, but this book literally sucks the soul out of me. I love Theo, but OMG, Winter is insufferable. And then I'm gonna have to like blur the rest of that review because it's got spoilers all over the place. I don't know. I don't think Winter was that bad. I'm kind of surprised at how many people hated Winter so much. Okay, and I think we're gonna go ahead and stop there. There actually wasn't very many just like kind of funny comments. It was more people actually being constructive about that one, which is kind of interesting. Next up, we're gonna actually go to the cozy fantasy realm with Half a Soul. This one I specifically liked because I really enjoyed the banter and the writing style of this book as well. Basically, this entire series is written in like Regency England. So in my head, I'm kind of thinking like Bridgerton vibes. I don't know if that's the same type of thing, but the writing and kind of like the way people act kind of reminds me of that kind of thing. For instance, like in the first season of Bridgerton, Daphne can't be like seen by herself with a male. Like those kind of like societal rules, I feel like these books kind of stick to that. And it also does a really good job, like I said, about actually making the people, like as far as like the dialogue between the characters, like they speak like that as well. I really, really enjoyed this. Like this one was another one that kind of surprised me. I purchased a few different cozy fantasies last year, one of which being Legends and Lattes, and don't get me wrong, I did enjoy that book, but I think I ended up giving it like a 3.5 stars. Like it wasn't like my favorite book. It didn't blow me away. I just thought it was cute. So I was kind of going into this other cozy fantasy kind of thinking I would probably rate it around the same thing, but this one really took me by surprise. I really, really enjoyed it. But anyway, let's go ahead and look at some 1-star reviews. This one is titled Unsatisfying Drivel. I had moderate expectations for this Regency/fantasy romance, but clearly I should have lowered them to subterranean levels. It isn't merely that the story is unoriginal, which I actually thought the story was original. Maybe I just haven't read enough, I don't know. But generally the concept is about a girl who loses half of her soul to the Fae, and she's basically just lived her entire life from like childhood to like early adulthood having half a soul. Like she doesn't react to things like a normal person. She doesn't have fears. She doesn't like get embarrassed, like that kind of thing, which sounds honestly amazing. But also with it being Regency era time, I think it made for a fun plot because she's obviously very unfiltered, which societal norms for that time don't really allow for that, especially in women. And it just kind of made it more fun to me personally, but we've got a couple of DNFs. DNF'd 50%. The pacing was what did it for me. It moved so slowly and was as blasé as the character herself. Then we have a 48% DNF. This was so incredibly disappointing. This person said, I have to stop reading these fairy books. I don't like them. Fair, totally fair. And then the other very popular opinion amongst the 1-star reviewers is that it was just really boring. And I think we're gonna go ahead and move on. The next book that we're gonna look up reviews for is actually the very first book that I read this year, and that is The 7-Year Slip. And this is a romance slash, it's got some like magical realism in it, which historically, I have not read a whole lot of magical realism, but up until this author, it was definitely a genre that I didn't think that I liked. This person said DNF because WTF happened to the stakes. Low, verging on non-existent is what they were. There was zero tension, no angst. For a romance, this definitely was kind of, I don't know, I would honestly kind of consider it like a cozy romance. I don't know if that's a thing, but I totally agree that there were no stakes and there, I don't think, was any tension, which I'm just now realizing. Typically, tension in a romance is my absolute favorite, and if a romance book doesn't have that, like, what's the point? It was always kind of my thought process, but now that they mention it, there wasn't really any tension, and clearly it didn't bother me. The buildup of the romance itself was just very slow and very sweet. This person said, so stupid. It's so highly rated that I'm wondering whether I read the same book as everyone else. One day I'm going to find a 5-star romance book, but it is not today. Ooh, okay, this one's kind of interesting. This one says, I'm so fucking disappointed with this that although it rightly would be a 2, I'm giving it a 1. I feel that, but for the opposite reasons. Like, a lot of times I give books like 5 stars, and I feel like they probably shouldn't actually be 5 stars, but I enjoyed them so much, or I was surprised at how much I liked it, that I end up rating it higher than I probably would have. Slow, boring, and forced. A lot of people seem to think that this book was very slow. This person says, got to page 250 and couldn't make myself read this crap anymore. All of the characters piss me off. There's been very few books where I've actually gotten like pissed off by a character. Nesta basically being, I think, really the only one. That's not true. There's been a couple others, but she's the only one I can really specifically think of. Okay, so here's another example of me just like not remembering spice happening in a book, because this one says, spice bland. I do not remember this book having spice in it. Like, at all. So maybe there was tension in it and I'm just not remembering. I did read that months ago. I really feel like I need to pay more attention to stuff like that if I'm gonna give like good solid reviews to you guys, because man. I think that'll be it for this book. Most people just thought it was boring and slow. Next up we have Wicked Beauty. So this is gonna like spice things up a little bit, I think, because Wicked Beauty is actually the 3rd book in a like smut series called Dark Olympus by Katie Robert. I read the very first book in this series like the beginning of last year, didn't really enjoy it, but then I ended up picking up randomly the 2nd book in the series at the beginning of this year. And since then, I've kind of been picking my way through the series and I've definitely grown to really enjoy it. And Wicked Beauty is my favorite of the entire series so far. This entire series is basically Greek mythology inspired. It might even be retellings. I'm not really familiar with Greek mythology stories, so I don't know if they're like retellings or not, but they're at the very least inspired by. However, they are not fantasy. These are more kind of like modern mafia style romances slash smut. And this book in particular has one of my favorite spice tropes, which is kind of like the wide shoes slash multiple partner kind of vibe. And I've said this so many times, but that kind of trope I like specifically because it gives me found family vibes, and found family across any genre is one of my favorites. Like, I absolutely eat that trope up. And this one in particular is about Helen of Troy, Achilles, and Patroclus. So let's go ahead and look at some 1-star reviews. Okay. The first one says, first of all, why add Helen? That just ruined the whole book, bro. Helen was with Paris and Patroclus and Achilles. Why add an unneeded slash unwanted throuple? And then I can't read the rest because there's spoilers in it. But what? This one says, update, I'm bumping this down to a 1-star because the more I think about it, the angrier it makes me feel. Hello and welcome to me trying to make sense of this shit show of a book and only sort of failing. I'd like to start off by apologizing to my Kindle that has been thrown across the room more times than I care to admit throughout my reading of this book. My heart rate was probably a little too high and not for the right reasons. Oh, wow. The first note that they're making about why they didn't like it is essentially that the story, like the book, doesn't follow the mythology. So I think that's fair. But for someone like me who doesn't know the mythology, obviously didn't bother me because I didn't know. They're also not liking that it's got bad communication, which I mean, these are really small books. I'm also someone that hates the like bad communication trope. I feel like there's a different way to say that because bad communication sounds wrong, but I don't know what it is. Anyway, miscommunication. The miscommunication trope. I'm not a fan of that. But again, these books are so small that even if there is miscommunication or bad communication, it's not going to last very long because the book literally doesn't have space for it. Let's see what else people are saying. DNF at page 198. Again, very short books. I feel like, how much more did they have left? Self-care is DNFing books you fucking hate. So very valid. This series is just erotica. It's not romance. There are no plots. And this one was the worst yet. So that's kind of funny. It sounds like she might be reading the series, and this one was her least favorite, whereas it was my favorite. And yeah, like I mentioned to begin with, this is erotica / smut. There is plot, but it's very minimal. Although I will say the deeper you get into the series, I do feel like the author introduces more plot. This one says, I think I'm ready to give up on Robert. Can't get down with her female leads. I can definitely relate to this comment. Katie Robert is one of, I think, the only authors where her books are very, very hit and miss for me. I either really, really like them or really don't. My camera battery died, so the lighting is darker now because the sun is now covered up, which is so annoying. Also, I don't remember where we were at. I know we were talking about Wicked Beauty, but I don't remember what review specifically we were on. So we're just gonna move on. We're gonna start back up with our next book on the list, which is Bride. And this book I was so obsessed with. Going into this one, I can definitely imagine what some of the reviews are going to be. Oh, the sun's coming back. Hopefully it stays like this, just a little bit longer. I can definitely guess at what some of the reviews for this one might be. And speaking of, the very first review that I am looking at basically says exactly what I'm thinking, which is, yeah, this did not serve. Bride is basically a paranormal romance between a vampire and a werewolf. And basically the one thing that I heard about this book before reading it over and over and over again was about the knot, which going into the book, I had no idea what that was. Figured it out while I was reading and looked it up to see if it was a real thing, and it is. And I'm not going to go into detail about like what specifically it is, but it's basically something that a dog or like a canine type animal has that comes out to play when they get spicy. I feel like if the knot was like something that was made up, it wouldn't have bothered me, but the fact that like real life animals have it just weirds me out. It puts the spice into a realm I don't really want to go into, but it was like very minimally talked about, and the rest of the book very much made up for it. It was such a good book. Ew. Okay. I can't really remember where exactly this quote is taken from, but it definitely does, taken out of the context of the rest of the book, sound really gross. So this says, in quotes, I nibble his glands. Ew. And then the actual review says, that's all you need to know from this book. I mean, yeah. That doesn't sound great for sure. The idea of nibbling on a gland just sounds really gross. But anyway, the only good thing this book did was choose the most suitable name for the FMC, aka Misery, because it is in complete accordance with what you are going to feel as you navigate the pages of this story, and pray to all the existing gods above to give you the strength to get over the next growl, knot, or horrible tech joke. Good grief. This review just says abysmal. This one also has a quote from the book. It says, you are officially condemned to a lifetime of misery. This is exactly how I felt after reading this book. Oh, another misery pun. We have misery-able. People are getting really creative. I like paranormal romance, but this is barely that. There is no building of the world or characters, just writing around tropes to get Ali Hazelwood size difference kink smut. I don't really understand the last bit of the sentence, but I do kind of agree with the world building aspect. There really isn't like a ton. It's mostly centered around the tension and the relationship between the two main characters, which when I'm reading romance, I don't really mind that. The review section for this book is the best because everyone is doing puns of either Misery's name or the knot, and it's great. This one says, I like this book in the middle, but then I did not. No, because no, and I will not be making any further comments. That's 410 pages of my life that I will not be getting back. And then I think the last review we're going to read for this one says, the only reason I didn't DNF this is because it's Ali Hazelwood, but I wish I had, because nope, this was not for me. Let's hope she keeps writing contemporary romance because I loved all of those books. I mean, I agree. I would love for her to keep writing contemporary romance, but I also would really love for her to write another paranormal one. The next book that we're gonna read some reviews for is one that surprised me so much, Butcher and Blackbird. This one is basically a romance between two serial killers, and I went into this book pretty much with no expectations because the concept of that just sounded so bizarre. And I was not disappointed whatsoever. I thought this book was so fun. And the very first one that we have says, absolutely horrendous book. Ooh, okay, this one says, whoever compared this to the Mindfuck series needs some jail time. I've never read the Mindfuck series, but it is something that's been on like my radar for a very long time. Let me know if you've read the Mindfuck series and how you liked it. This one says, thanks, I hate it. Love that. I DNF'd about 30% of the way through. I know these characters are meant to be messed up, but would it have killed the author to write them like the ages they were meant to be? I couldn't get into it at all. I had absolutely no emotional connection to the characters, and the humor wasn't even funny or dark. It was just lackluster. I actually don't know how old the characters were supposed to be. I pictured them though like late teens, maybe very early 20s kind of age, which is kind of crazy to think about because they're serial killers, but so I'm thinking maybe she meant like they were young sounding, which I mean, agreed. And then as far as it being like funny, I don't know if it was like haha funny, but I definitely was amused. It was definitely entertaining. This one says it's like Dexter but hornier. I'm not really seeing the problem there. This one says DNF, cringe writing, cringe dialogue, terrible characters who are literally so annoying, the plot barely makes sense and feels really forced and unrealistic. I don't want to waste my time. I'm not sure how I enjoyed Ice Planet Barbarians, but couldn't get on board with this one. Okay, first of all, let me know if any of you have read Ice Planet Barbarians and what you thought. I've had that on my wish list and I've added it to my cart on Amazon so many times. I don't know why, but I keep going back and forth on that. Like I really want to read it, but then for some reason I talk myself out of it. So let me know if you guys have read it, what you thought. Second of all, as far as the actual review goes, cringe writing, cringe dialogue, terrible characters, sure. The person saying that it's unrealistic, I mean, it's a romance between two serial killers. I know there's a bunch of murder in this, but it's a bit too fluffy for me. Not that I don't like rom-coms, but this was a lot of banter and I never laughed. Going into this book, I definitely didn't know really what to expect, but it is a very fluffy rom-com style romance. Even though it's about two serial killers, it is very fluffy and very rom-com-y, but I feel like that's what made it so good. Like that's why I liked it so much. And then we have a bunch of DNFs. There's always a ton of DNFs in the 1-star reviews, which is fair. Somebody said I'm traumatized. I think we're gonna go ahead and stop there. Second to last, we have Red Rising, and I just can't imagine Red Rising having 1-star reviews. It was just so good. This first one says, oh my aching, bloody damn, gory balls. No, please, I insist. Allow me to put myself out of my own damn misery. And then they go on to say that it's repetitive, info dumps, shallow world building, repetitive, show don't tell, horrible characters, repetitive, stupid lingo, boring, etc., etc. And the bloody damn gory balls is a reference to some of the lingo in the book. Oh, okay, this one's kind of rude. It says, brain dead, wannabe, here's Red Rising. Pierce Brown, I'm a hack writer. Buy my copy of The Hunger Games on Mars, I mean Red Roses, Red Riding Hood, Red Rising, whatever. Here's what I wrote during my shifts at McDonald's. Somebody said, deleting this from my brain. Here's another one, kind of digging at the author. It says, a narcissistic author who creates a narcissistic main character he can live through. This guy is smarter, tougher, faster, and can do no wrong. He eases through every situation without sweat and continually pats himself on the back. The writing style is pretentious and it makes me cringe. I feel like that's in a lot of fantasy type novels, so that kind of thing doesn't bother me. I don't find it pretentious, but that is another word that I saw pop up a few times while skimming through some of these reviews. And yeah, this is like the second one where someone's kind of digging at the author themselves. So apparently people might not like Pierce Brown. This one says, this book left me feeling very underwhelmed. It's not that it is a bad book, there just wasn't anything about it that captured my imagination or set it apart from other sci-fi books. I mean, fair enough. I think I'm gonna go ahead and stop there with the Red Rising one. People are a lot more brutal about that one than any of the other books. Like, people are ripping that one apart. And I kind of want this video to be more lighthearted and fun, so we're gonna move on. The very last book that we're gonna do is Assistant to the Villain. I just read this one last month and am so obsessed with it. I put it off for the longest time because it just didn't seem like it was something that would appeal to me. But then I was actually reading the back of it at the bookstore and found out that it was a romance, which I did not realize. So I actually ended up picking it up from the library just in case I didn't like it. and loved it. This first one says, TikTok has got to stop convincing people they need to write a book because then we end up with a mess like this. Ouch. This one just says, oh, read this if you want an honest review by someone who didn't even know this author was on TikTok or whatever. Even though I checked and I guess I follow her, I had no idea. Anyway, here it is. I also did not have any idea that this author was on TikTok, but I do think I want to go follow them because I do like this book. The rest of her review says, I was having fun and then I was just annoyed. I even recommended this book to friends before the halfway mark, which I don't normally do, but it was such an interesting beginning and it was kind of refreshing in the oddball weirdness. So yeah, this book is very oddball weird, like very quirky, very just like goofy. It has a very lighthearted kind of vibe to it, which I ended up really liking. This one says, this book was terrible. I was bamboozled into reading this book by a high Goodreads score, but I should have looked further into the reviews to see that it was inflated by fans who haven't read the book yet, giving it 5 stars just because they like this author's related TikTok series. Reviews are there to like see if someone's gonna like a book or not, to give your critical thoughts or feelings on a book. And I do think it's kind of like defeating the purpose a little bit when you see a 5-star review and someone's like, oh, I can't wait for this book to come out. Like, you haven't even read it yet. I mean, I understand that those people are like trying to like support the author, but like just buy the book and then wait till you read it and then review it, you know? This person said, hated this with every iota of my being. The only way it could have possibly been worse was if there were pretty pictures or the 5-year-old audience it was written for. Oh no. That kind of piggybacks off of a review that I read. I didn't read it out loud to you guys, but I kind of skimmed through where the person was just talking about how there was no like real romance. Don't go into this expecting like this full tension-filled romance. It's not that type of book. It's kind of more of a crush, like watching two people that like each other get to know each other in a fun, goofy, completely bizarre way. This book couldn't hold my attention as much as I wanted it to. The writing was a little juvenile and I couldn't buy into the medieval modern office romance setting. It just didn't work for me and I'm sad for that. That was actually something that I thought was really fun, was the fact that in my head I kind of pictured the villain's lair as being kind of like a castle, like a full-on stone medieval castle, and he's just got all his like minions working for him and his office is in this like big stone like circular room. I don't know if that's actually how they described it, but that's what I pictured. And I love that. Again, it just kind of added to like the weird quirkiness of the book. This one says, wow, that was super bad. This was so painfully unfunny. I disagree. I actually laughed out loud several times while reading this book. I wanted to like this in a campy, ironic fan fiction kind of way, but it was just bad, and the story was bad, and the characters were bad, and the ending was bad. It did have a dragon though. Always bonus points for a dragon. Again, when I went into this book, I mean, I can't harp on it enough, but like, again, when I went into this book, I didn't really know what to expect, but you find out pretty quickly that it is this kind of like campy, done on purpose, goofy kind of story. And I think once I figured that out, I just kind of let it ride, and that's what I was there for, you know? I've had pancakes that weren't as flat as these characters. This one just says, no. This person says, in all caps, hate. A friend convinced me not to DNF, and I am now mad at them forever. And none of the jokes were funny, the POV was badly done, they kept repeating their names over and over again, the storyline made no sense. I hate this. I never hated anything more. And on that note, I think we're gonna go ahead and end the video there. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Again, this was meant to just be lighthearted and fun. I hope you had a good time watching. I definitely had a good time filming it. Let me know if this is something that you want me to do again. I definitely have a lot more favorite books that we can go over. And yeah, I think that is everything that I have to say. I hope you guys have had the most amazing of days, and I will hopefully see you in my next one. Bye!